Plants, the green frontier. These are the discussions of the podcast Horticult. Its continuing mission to talk about strange new cultivars, to seek out new flowers and plant them, to boldly garden like no one has before. Hey, this is Beefland for the Horticult. What's up, everybody? On this episode of the podcast, we talk about relocating woody plants. Early spring is a good time, and we talk about why. Pruning back before moving is a good idea, and we talk about why. Pre-dig your hole, but you could hold it over and putting it in a pot until you decide where you want to put it. Reasons why you should move it. So maybe it's unhealthy. Maybe you're putting in a sidewalk. You don't want to scrap it, so you figure you can put it somewhere else. Talk about root pruning with a little bit of foresight. You can actually prepare your plant for being relocated, and we call that root pruning. And we go over those steps. And then also when you move it, it's a good time for organic fertilizers like bone meal, blood meal, and worm castings. So I just want to say thank y'all for listening. We love you. Let's get it on. This is Beef Lane.
This is B-Rad.
And we are the Horticult. And thanks for tuning in, podlings. Thanks for coming along for the ride. In this lovely episode of the podcast, we're going to talk about moving plants around. What?
Moving plants, packing up their boxes and moving them out.
That's right. Get the freak out of my yard.
Just kidding.
No, we were just talking about this is a good time of year. We try to hit these episodes on something that is pertinent,
applicable
to the season that we are in, and therefore it's a good time to move plants around. Like, say if you have a plant that you like, but you're seeing that it might not be doing so well in the spot that you chose, or maybe you researched it a little more and you can move it. Now, probably something that hasn't been long-term established. I'll let Brad discuss it because I've never done this.
Well, it's something that I've been thinking about in my own. I've done it many times in many different years in the past, but I've as I'm out in my yard on the daily, and I'm just kind of checking stuff out. There was this one shrub in particular. It's a vitex. It's just in the wrong place, and it has been for a few years. But and it's a tough plant. It'll grow every year in that tough, rough corner. But my objective is to relocate that, is to transplant that in a different part of the yard, give it more space to kind of let it have its own space and just branch out really nicely. So by saying that, now is the time to do it. What are the parameters, you ask? Like, can you just run out there with the shovel right now, today, in the middle of the winter and just dig that puppy up? My answer to that is yes. If the ground is not solid. Yeah, if it's not frozen solid. So, and I've seen over the last many weeks, the temperatures kind of like creep up into the 40s, 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And then it'll, obviously in the nighttime, then the ground refreezes. Maybe the top, half inch or inch of soil will freeze. But at that peak time of the day when it's 40 and the sun is shining, is a really good time to go out there, test the soil to then use your shovel or spade. A little bit of forethought before you just start going and digging up all your shrubs and trees. Think about the size of canopy that shrub currently has. The beautiful thing about dormancy in the wintertime with plants is that you can then prune them back. Much more manageable to move, and then B, in the spring when they start to releaf and kind of flush out, they are not overtaxed with trying to, because their roots are going to be severed, right? They're going to be cut and pruned. They'll have less feeder roots and all of that they're going to be trying to reestablish. Give it just a nice prune job on the top. Reduce the canopy. It goes for shrubs, trees, woody perennials, which in my opinion is a shrub. Obviously, if we're talking like herbaceous perennials, that's not nearly as big of a deal because a lot of the time you can just scoop up with one shovel load and get the entire root system on those guys.
What is the biggest plant that you've tried to do with this and have it succeed? Because I could see it being like you don't want to try anything too large.
Well, if you think about how large of a ball and burlap tree that one person can handle, maybe one or two people can handle. I mean, we've planted trees before, Miranda, and several places where, the ball and burlap is, what would you say, like 2 feet, 24 inches in diameter. And, you can roll it and you can spin it around and get it down in the hole and everything. Obviously, without professional help, that's about the size of plant we're talking about. So even small trees can be transplanted. You're going to want to go ahead and spade or prune those roots at least minimum 2 feet around in diameter around that tree. The more the better. But what I've found quite often, I've gone out 3 feet before. And what happens is a lot of that soil just kind of sloughs off. And so then you're left with bare roots. Well, if bare roots you can still plant bare roots in the winter, and they'll be better than severed roots. Always a good idea, whether it's retransplanting, relocating plants, or simply planting for the first time. Find the spot that you're going to plant in, go over there, pre-dig your hole to the depth that you feel like you need to go. Usually you're going to want to go down 18 to 24 to 36 inches based on how big the plant is, if it's a big tree. If it's a shrub, 12 to 16 inches should be good enough.
Well, just like as you're thinking, to me, it's like, well, if that plant in that location that you have it is not performing well and it's going to die, what's the worst that's going to happen? It's either going to die where it is, or you move it and it has this chance to survive in a better location. So it might as well take the gamble. It's not going to make it where it is.
Yeah,
so
that's so true. And sometimes you're relocating these plants for the health and the benefit of the plant, and other times it's because there might be a sidewalk or concrete going in, and it's like, we're going to lose this guy anyway. Let's do something with it. Another thing you can do if you don't have a spot in your yard right away immediately is go ahead and get one of those landscape black plastic pots that they use. I believe it's like a 15 or 20 gallon pot is what they call it in the nursery. You can put your shrub or tree in that just to hold it over for some time. As long as you water it in and you protect it somewhat from the elements. You don't have to bring it inside your house or anything.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be really heavy.
It will be. That's right. That's going to be the deciding factor as far as how big of a specimen that you...
When you're dealing with straight earth opposed to potting mix or whatever, it's way heavier, the difference. You might think you might be able to move something around that is good size, usually. Typically, you don't want to mess with stuff with real earth in it. It's just way heavier. Real
quick, too, so just on the back side of that subject, as far as relocating plants, trees, shrubs, you have your hole dug. You go on over there, toss this thing in there, making sure that the roots are going to be covered as you backfill. But this is a perfect time to add any kind of organic fertilizers like bone meal, blood meal, worm castings, any of these kinds of things that will help give the nutrients back to that tree as it's trying to reroot and then re-leaf out and flush out for the spring. It's a good time to do that, and then backfill with mulch. And a good practice is, and this is planting anything, as you're planting any trees or shrubs and you're backfilling with that soil, when they say heel it in, I've heard that term when I worked in the nursery. Just heel that in. Really what they mean is the heel of your foot. Just kind of give it a nice gentle push down into the soil, kind of straight away, all the way around in a circular fashion. Will and should hold that tree and or shrub or plant in place for the time being, so that wind doesn't come up, blow it over, and then water it in. Completely essential that it's watered in immediately, because again, everything's quite dormant, but it will need to be watered in a relatively short amount of time thereafter. So
do you ever practice staking? Have you ever staked your trees?
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good question. I have staked trees. If I can get away with not staking, that's a little bit better, because you do want some movement in the trunk from wind and the elements to help kind of build up and make itself sturdy. But I have staked trees before in the past, and I try to leave that stake on there for no more than 6 months, just to simply just get it started through one growing season, or like the spring really is when it really just goes gangbusters. And then after that, just allow it to, even if it seems really floppy and weak, you have to let that tree toughen up. Best way I could put it.
Yeah, like what I had heard was basically the same thing. I'd heard one season, but I mean, that could be a year. Like, it's up to interpretation what that means. One growing season of staking. I see it practiced that they stake them so much like a fence post. They tie it so tight around them, and they're just I've seen it before where it's like 3 or 4 stakes around one tree and making it so solid, and it's like, that is not a good practice, because you're not letting that tree have some of that sway and tension and stuff to build up its own roots stronger. So it's almost like always picking up a little baby and never letting them learn how to walk or whatever. You're just always tending. It's
enabling the tree.
Enabling it. You're just making it a super weak tree. And then you don't ever want to have it tight around the tree, your ties.
Like right next to the trunk, huh?
Yep. Really tight, because then it cuts off the cambium, which that is the most important part of the living tree, is the cambium. It's just that thin little layer. And if you plant those things too tight, it'll suffocate it a little bit.
Well, and that goes for everybody out there. If you have trees that are, for example, planted by the city, municipalities, and they stake the trees, and that's a good thing in the beginning, but quite often they don't come back and take the stakes off, and so a lot of the time I've seen trees girdled, really nice, healthy trees in the beginning, over time get girdled, and it just kills me to see that. And so, by all means, cut the cord.
Cut the umbilical.
It does get a little bit tricky in relocating and transplanting evergreens. Not greatly, but because they're still photosynthesizing in the winter, they're dormant, but they're not 100% dormant. They haven't lost their needles and leaves. They're a little bit more sensitive to being moved, even in the winter. But by saying that, the winter still is the best time to even relocate those evergreen types. And they are absolutely essential that you water those in immediately after the transplant. Another thing that I thought was kind of interesting, a lot of people have talked to me about, I want to move this tree, and this is in the summertime, right? In the growing part of the season. I want to move this tree or shrub. And I say, okay, take it easy. Just wait till the winter.
Way easy, baby. Easy.
Yeah, wait till the winter time. That's the best time to do it. But what you can do is you can root prune now in lieu of transplanting it or relocating it later with higher success. And I say that on any varieties that are large. Like the bigger the variety, the tougher you can successfully get it to transplant. But if you root prune it, meaning you take your shovel, your spade, whatever, and you make your 3 foot in diameter cut zone around that, go ahead and root prune that as best you can. You're not going to cut all of the main branches out, but really you're going to be cutting like the feeder roots and getting it to kind of stay within that bowl.
It's almost like you're already prepping it. you're cutting it where the pot would be. That's